This is a technical training video on how to set up SonicWall Firewall in high availability, in HA for short. This video is purely technical. We'll go through the UI, we'll set up the HA, and we'll also test it out. I'll have a VoIP call going through while I'm pulling as many cable as I can. Here, I'm not going to cover licensing and other non-technical matters because I've done it in a HA overview video where I've put the link in the description box down below. So here we'll set up two common HA deployments that I see. One is the SMB version that I'll call, that I often and pretty much always see into small and medium businesses. That is 2 firewall in HA and 1 switch. Then we'll do the enterprise version that remains still the same 2 firewall in HA, but the switches are 2 switches that are stacked, and we'll use LACP, link aggregation, and we will end up with having not a single point of failure. And we'll finish off the video by having a VoIP call going through the firewall again while we perform a firmware upgrade on our HA appliances. Hi, I'm Jean-Pierre Talbot, SE for SonicWall in Canada, helping customer and reseller get the most out of their network security solutions. If you're new here, make sure you hit the subscribe button so you don't miss out on upcoming videos. And all the link to the content I'll mention will be in the description box down below. So buckle up, I feel it's gonna be quite a long video, so enjoy! Couple housekeeping item before moving on testing this out. So please look in the description box down below. I've put a KB to SonicWall that explain what are all the prerequisites that you need to get HA working, and SonicWall is doing a very good job at keeping those updated as long as following the firmware update they do and different changes that may occur. So please refer to the KB in the description box down below. But for sure, what you need is 2 identical firewalls. So here we'll be using 2 NSA 3700s. So you cannot mix and match and say I want a 3700 and a 2700 and do an HA. Not gonna work. 2 identical models. Then also you need to buy 1 main unit with all the services. You need to activate that unit first. Then activate your HA appliance, and with the process, during the process of activating the HA firewall, it will ask you which main unit you want to pair with. So you need to ensure that the units are paired, otherwise licenses will not transfer from a unit to another. And also you need to make sure you are using X0. So if you look at the documentation, the KB I'm referring to, it states that the firewall are using X0 as a redundancy type of communication between both units. So make sure you are using X0 on this firewall. And finally, if you have your main firewall running and you're using 7 interfaces because you have 7 different zones or networks, you absolutely need to have all them on the second firewall. I do not advise to make you decide like, yeah, I want HA only on those, and those last 2 network I don't care. Well, it will work. There is a way to make it work, but not suggested. And before moving on, you will hear during the test that I do with the audio that the audio of the phone may appear to be choppy. It is, I believe, due to the audio software I'm using. I am trying to remove the big noise of the switches that I'm using. They have very loud fan, so I'm trying to remove that noise, which I believe I really succeed very well, but it tends to remove and make the phone audio choppy a bit. So I guess the program had a hard time between finding, the switch noise versus phone noise, and I guess maybe at some point the frequencies of the noise were about the same, which then that get caught. But the point is, sorry, audio got a bit choppy on the recording due to noise cancelling I'm using, but trust me, during the recording, audio was not choppy. I tried to, have the phone to be louder, but then I had to yell so that you guys could understand me, but I didn't feel you guys want to hear me yelling for an hour. So I decided, well, audio will be choppy a bit on the recording for the VoIP call. So sorry for that. So first we will do a common HA deployment that I do see into small and medium businesses. That will be 2 firewall in HA and 1 switch. So here is how I personally get a HA going. I always start with no HA. So I get my switch and I have 1 firewall. And what I'll just do the very basic setup for stuff to work. So really nothing fancy. I'll show you the config. I've pretty much done nothing. So my switch here, I created one VLAN for VoIP, I believe it's VLAN 700, and here I've created one VLAN for data. So here it's going to be my VoIP phones, and here that would be laptops. I know usually that would be like trunk ports and stuff where you do have one cable going to the phone and the phone is connected to the PC, but here I wanted to keep things simple. So white cables are VoIP and blue would be data, laptops, workstation, and so forth. And here what I've done here, very simple again, I do have my WAN, the black one, blue is data on X1, and I've set X12 as the VoIP network, the VoIP interface. And here is a VoIP phone hooked up right here. All right, stay there, you phone. So I will show you the UI of the firewall. So as you can see here, it is a NSA 3700. I have no HA set up yet whatsoever. If I go into licenses, you do see the firewall is registered. It is fully licensed. And if I go see in firmware, I do have the latest firmware. Actually, you do put the latest firmware. That's what I would suggest you. But here for demo purposes, I'm not running the latest because later on in the video, I will do a OS upgrade of my HA once it is set up. So I want you guys to see what it looks like. So, but here I would suggest put the latest firmware, register the firewall so you do have licenses. And in terms of policies and access rule, as you can see, it is very basic. From LAN to WAN, I have a policy that allows everything, and from VoIP to WAN, I also have a policy that allows everything, which is exactly the opposite of one of the video about my tips and tricks of to increase security, which is to absolutely kill those policies and open the ports, only open the ports that you do need. But here, again, extremely basic setup. I just want stuff to work. Register the firewall, update the firmware, set interfaces, create an access rule so stuff work, and then after we will create a HA setup. In your case, if you already have a firewall in production, everything is set, all policies are in, everything works, it's been set for months, maybe for years, and you do want to get into HA, well, fine. You do have one firewall working, then you are at the same step as I am here. Create the HA is the next step. So we'll go back over there. We'll do the cabling, and after we'll come back here and do the configuration. So like I mentioned at the beginning of the video, you do need all cables that are connected to one firewall to be connected to the second firewall. So here is second firewall. Brand new firewall. Well, it's not brand new, but just assume it's brand new out of its cardboard box. No firmware updated. It's the built-in firmware that came out from factory. No config whatsoever. Really fresh out of the box. Well, the only thing I'll have to do is power it on, replicate the ports, the configuration, the cabling, and then we'll go do configuration. So, as you can see, remember that's my switch. Actually, I'll move you closer here. So as you can see, again, that's my main firewall with everything configured, my switch. So we see that I do have X0 going to my data VLAN. So I need to ensure that this firewall also has X0 going to that very same VLAN. So pretty easy to do. So X0 going here. So one down. Then is my VoIP network. X12 on my firewall goes into that VLAN here. So I need to do the exact same thing. X12 here going in that VLAN. So pretty straightforward. Next is my WAN. As you can see here, my black cable. Maybe black was not the best choice of color, but I took what I had at the store. So I need that WAN to be accessed by both firewall, right? But my ISP only gave me one cable. So what I would advise you to do, take your switch and create a small VLAN on it. For instance, in this switch, I've put port 22, 23, and 24 as one VLAN. So at first, the first thing I told you was this is the VoIP VLAN, this is the data VLAN. Well, it was actually a lie. Those here are data VLAN, and the 3 ports here are another VLAN. I believe I've put VLAN 100 for this. So this is the VLAN I will be using to connect internet. So I take the cable that comes from the ISP, put it into the VLAN, and take 2 more cables, one in that same VLAN going into X1, and the 3rd port of that VLAN going into the other firewall here. And next you will see in the configuration, which we will do in a minute, I need to have 2 ports on the firewall that will be used for HA. We'll dig into those a bit like in a minute from now. So for now, we'll just connect them. So I'll take port 22, connect this to port 22, and 23 to port 23. And those are not crossover cables, they're just standard cable. So I got stuff hooked up. I'll just make it nice. Here, as we can see, my firewall is still booting. So before we do the config, I would suggest you give time to the firewall to actually boot. Oh, well, that was quick. It's done. So let's move to the configuration of the HA. So as you can see, my HA is still not configured. So to do a HA, you go into Devices, High Availability, and Settings. So setting my HA mode is none. I'll switch this to active standby. Then I'll explain those features here. So enable stateful synchronization. That is something I advise you to turn on if you did bought the license. I didn't cover all licensing in this because I've done a HA overview video to explain licensing and how things work and so forth, but the stateful HA is a one-time fee. You buy that license once in a lifetime, no renewal, no nothing, and it enables your firewall to have a stateful HA, because a lot of times I do get customer asking, I want active HA because if one fails, I don't want anything to stop. I want this to be totally transparent. So as an SE, it's kind of my job to understand what they ask and actually what they really want. So with SonicWall, we do have active standby firewall, but it is a stateful HA. That means that the passive firewall, the one doing nothing other than waiting for the main unit to die, that unit is fully aware of all the connections going on. So the reason I have a VoIP phone is I simply want to get a VoIP call going, put myself on hold so I get a on hold music playing, and then trigger failover, and you will see that my VoIP call never drop. It just keep going, and in some instance I have no loss of audio whatsoever. And to the worst scenarios, I do lost audio for like a second or two, but the call keeps going. That's the purpose of the stateful HA. So the passive firewall is fully aware there is a VoIP call going, there is active connections and everything. Like YouTube, if you're streaming YouTube, well, there is a constant stream of video with YouTube. So if you do a HA failover, the other firewall will be like, yeah, I remember, I do have that. I know there is some YouTube video going on streaming, so it will keep going just like if nothing happened. So that's the beauty of stateful HA. So if you do have the license, well, I would strongly advise you use it, so turn it on. The preempt mode. So when you bought your firewall, you bought one unit which was fully licensed with all the great security features, content filtering, IPS, botnet, sandboxing, and all those. And you bought a second unit that was a fraction of the price, and that was the HA unit. So for some reason, there's people that want to make sure that the main unit, the one they bought with all licenses, is always the one running. So the preempt mode is doing exactly this. So the main unit will always be the one processing all traffic, And if that unit lost an interface or simply lost power or anything, it will fail over to the passive unit, the second unit. So the second unit will become the active. But if you turn on preempt mode, as soon as the main unit come back in a full healthy setup, let's say it's all interfaces are up, it's fully all good, it will go back, it will fail over again to go back on the main unit. I personally don't suggest using this, and the only reason I see doing it is if you run an HA setup, but you're doing it with multi-site. So you do have one office with everything, all servers, all employees, and you do have another office which will be called your DR, disaster recovery. So there's no employee, there's no nothing, just racks and servers and stuff just in case something happened to the head office. And you do HA with one unit at the head office and the other unit at the DR site. Then it might be, I would believe it's, well, yes, I do vote for it. So I would say yes, preempt mode would be nice, because then as soon as the head office firewall comes back to life, all traffic will be forced back on the main unit. So that would avoid like going from the head office with where all employees are, and then in the fiber going to the DR site and then come back and reach servers and stuff. So that would make it easier, but eventually I want to do a video for it. But if you do run HA, like I'll show it in the video where both firewalls are in the same building, I personally don't see value in enabling preempt mode. That just creates extra failover for nothing, I believe. And also there's nothing wrong at having your HA unit being the active firewall for years. It will be fully licensed, everything works fine, it just works as good as the main unit because they're exactly the same physical unit. So there's no reason to always want the main unit to be the active one, except in a HA you've done it in multi-site, which I will maybe do another video on it. Next, I would suggest to turn on virtual MAC. So that means that the MAC address of the firewall, when you do an HA, will follow as well. So the MAC address that was on the main unit, on unit 1, the active one, will actually go to the passive unit, which will become the active unit. So the MAC address will follow, which ensure that the stateful, ensure like a more smooth transition. And actually with the old VoIP phone I have, if I'm not selecting virtual MAC on, my VoIP call just stop. It's not gonna keep working. It will not come back unless I reconnect the cable, and now that the main unit comes back as the active one. So the phone, the very old phone, is kind of not smart enough to redo a ARP request or anything. It's just gonna keep trying to connect to the same MAC, and that firewall is not active anymore, so it's not processing any traffic. It's not going to try to do another ARP request to see what's the MAC address of the new firewall running. So if you enable virtual MAC, the MAC address will kind of transfer from one firewall to another, so any device will just keep processing traffic as is, like if nothing happened. Enable encryption for controlled communication. That one, in a setup like this, the control interface is here, so I don't think I need to encrypt that traffic because it's a direct cable that is about 2 inches long, so there's not much danger in not encrypting that communication over 3 inches. But if you do again have a HA multi-site where you're running on a fiber and other different network where you may not have all control, you may want to turn on the encryption here. So for a standard setup where both firewalls are right next to each other, that's how I would set it up with all those 4 options. Then I need to provide serial number. So serial number of the main unit, we have it, it's there. Then we need to give serial number of the second unit, which is this one. So you just paste it in there. So that's the serial number of both units. And here, remember I told you I will explain the 2 yellow cables I've connected. So there is one needed for HA control interface and one for HA data interface. So I will pick the 2 I've selected, 22 and 23. So those were the 2 cables that I've connected with the yellow cables, the very short tiny one I've used. So very easy to set up. You hit accept, and it's gonna do all magic for you. Eventually we'll hear, well, maybe you're not gonna hear it on the audio, but the the new firewall, the HA firewall, will actually reboot. Yes, you need to put different serial number. That will throw an error if you put the same serial number twice. So hit accept. So now it's gonna do all the synchronization. If the firmware on the firewall is not the same as the primary firewall, it will update the firmware. It's gonna do sync and all those magic things. And you can go into status here and you will be able to see the progression of it, right? So as we can see, the status, it says active, peer found yes. So, you know, things seems to look good. Licenses are there, but settings are not synced and the HA is not synced yet. So we just need to give it a minute or two, and that's usually the time where you go grab a coffee. And you may not hear it, but the firewall is actually rebooting, and it is the one we just added, the passive one. I mean the passive, the HA unit. That's the one that is rebooting, the one we just added. So the impact on your production network is, of course, shouldn't be too much impacted. And of course, like everything, that's something I would suggest if you can to do outside business hours, right? Because if things go south for whatever reason, it's always good to not have 200 people yelling at you and waiting for you to fix it. Okay, now the HA appliance, the one we just added, finish rebooting. And if we hit status again, so it refresh, as you can see, status primary active, the primary unit is active, the second unit is standby, and peer found, settings are synced, stateful HA is synced, interfaces are up, yes, yes, all good. If we go back on home, see we do have 2 thumbs up, so looks good. Like that new UI, by the way, you can just click that double-decker hamburger, and it brings you exactly here to see the status. So we'll go on the other menus. That one we covered it. The advanced menu, quite frankly, I've never ever touched anything in this menu except a force active failover, which we will do later. Now moving on to monitoring. Here, as you can see, we do have interfaces of the firewall, and we do have small checkboxes next to the interfaces that are in use. So we'll just go in X0 for now. We'll take the first one. Click the small pen next to it to click on edit. So see here, my HA will monitor the physical link. So you know that those small LEDs on a physical port on the firewall, it will monitor if the link is up. And if the link goes down, well, that will trigger a failover. If that is not turned on, failover will not occur even if the interface goes down. So something I strongly suggest you turn on. Here, you do have IP addresses here, and be careful, those are not IP address to pull and probe. That's here. Here, what you can do is set an interface for the set an IP address on that interface for the primary firewall, which is something I would strongly suggest you do. It gives you 2 major advantages. The first one being, if you want to connect to a specific appliance in your HA, like you want to connect to the passive appliance to look at logs, maybe that's something support may ask you at one point if you do end up having some issues. So you will need the passive appliance to have an IP address so you can connect to it. And the second one, if you do want to set logical probe, say like ping my VMware server, that's a big farm with all the vMotion stuff, it's redundant and everything, so it will never ever go down. You want to tell the firewall, not just monitor the link state of the port, but also trying to ping this IP address to make sure that the network is fully functional for each firewall. If you want this to work, well, the main firewall, the active one, will be able to ping that thing because it's the one having like the IP addresses of all interface, which will float from one box to another in case of a failover. But the passive appliance, the one that is not active, the one doing nothing but waiting for the master to fail, that one has no IP at all. So there is no way for it to monitor any other IP addresses. It doesn't have an IP. So that's the value also to put IP addresses to the firewall. So here, as you can see, on X0, my subnet is 192.168.10.1. So that's the main IP of the firewall. That's the IP that will float from one box to another, depending on which unit is active. So here, what I'll do, I'll put an IP address to both boxes. I'll do 254 and 253. So that means that 10.1 again is the IP floating from one firewall to another. That will be the default gateway usually of workstation and other stuff. But if you do want to connect to the first unit, it's going to be 254. And if you want to connect to the second unit, it's going to be 253. So then if the secondary firewall happen to be the passive appliance in your HA, it will be able to monitor an IP address here. For instance, I could put 10.3, which is my core switch, right? That could be something I would like to do. So the passive firewall, the one that is a secondary as well as the HA, for instance, now has an IP and will actually be able to issue ping to this IP. So monitoring will work from both unit, even the passive one. So it's like okay on this. And if you want, you can do the other one as well, right? If you have here as my VoIP server, my VoIP interface, maybe my VoIP server would be something smart to monitor. So I could, again, go here, give an IP to both firewalls. The subnet here is, I don't even remember. Let's go have a look. So X0 is this, and X12 is this. So I could go back into my HA monitoring X12 and ensure that both units have an IP in that subnet. And I could put an IP address here to monitor. One thing I didn't mention, there's that checkbox as well. Allow management on primary, secondary IPv4 address. So if you want to be able to connect to the firewall, to each individual unit through those IP addresses here, you need this to be turned on, right? I'll turn it off here and hit OK. So as you can see, both units have an interface, and only on X0 I do have an IP address to probe. And now we will go force a HA failover in the advanced menu. The reason I want to do this is because first I want to test that the failover is working, and second is that I want the HA unit to be the active one because we do need to go register that unit. So you did register it on mysonicwall.com, but just like any physical firewall, you need to log into the UI of that unit and give it your credential of mysonicwall so it gets its license. So that's exactly what I want to do here. We'll just hit refresh, and it is a very good sign. I'm asked to provide my credential to the firewall again. If I go in Home, see here, device registration needed. It seems pretty clear. So you have the choice between the three buttons. So I'll pick the second one. Then you just provide your mySonicWall credentials. And now it is registered. So both units are registered, and we see that if we go back into our HA menu, status is happy. So next thing is to test. Very important. If you don't test stuff like your backup, you don't have backup. You just have a wish list. So if you don't test your HA, you don't have an HA, you just have a wish list. So we'll go test it out. So recap here, we have our both firewalls here and one switch, and we replicated all ports to both firewall. We both have the WAN here, the LAN here, and X12 for both is actually the VoIP network. So if we want to demo it, for what I'll do, I'll just pick the phone I have here. Phone I had, I guess. Hopefully it still works. So we'll just dial the other phone there. And I did put myself on hold, so I do get some gorgeous music again. So if we look here, we can see that this firewall is the active one. It's pretty clear the WAN is blinking a lot compared to this one. So what I'll do, I'll pull the cable of the LAN and pay attention to the music. You'll see what happened with the VoIP during the failover. nothing. It keeps going like if nothing happened. So next, what I'll do, I'll pull the network cable of the VoIP traffic, and you'll see it will do a tiny little glitch. So now this one is the active one. So let's pull the cable for VoIP and pay attention to the music. We lost music for like, what, half a second maybe. And now, of course, this one is the active one. And next, we can pull power of this firewall and you'll see what's happening. So we have a second song that will start. We'll just wait a bit. And I'll pull power. And audio came back after, I don't know, 2 seconds maybe. I'll just stop the phone call. So that was demo and test of our HA setup. So we know that HA is working, and we also see the value of the stateful HA. My phone call never dropped. It just barely stopped when I lost the interface. And if I cut power, then I lost audio maybe for 2 seconds. But the key is the phone call never ever dropped. So if you do have VPNs or people doing remote desktop and things like this, their connection will simply remain. It's not gonna drop. They won't have to restart everything. Everything just keep going like if nothing happened. So of course here you do get the point that if I lose the switch, I lost everything, right? I don't need to redo a phone call for you guys to get the point. I have redundant firewalls, but I don't have a redundant switch. So if the switch dies, everything is dead. So that leads us to the next step, which is to put in place redundant switches. So what I'll do, just like I did at the beginning of the video, I'll put the hardware, I'll connect cables, and then we'll go poke around the configuration of the firewall because we do need to change a bit of things. So we'll be using switches. As you can see, they have stacking cables on it. So those are 2 physical switches and they have, again, stacking cables. So the beauty of switches like this is the fact that you can actually have 2 switches, but they're seen and configured and they do everything just like if they were 1 switch. So those are the core switch. And the SonicWall switch will now be my access switch. So into large enterprise deployment, you always have firewall and HA, redundant switches. Those are the core switch. Usually you have distribution switches, and then you have access switches where you connect phones, laptop, and printers and all this stuff. To keep things simple here, I got rid of the distribution switches. So access switch, I could usually have many of them, and here I only have 1. The access switch will be connected to both core switches, and both core switches will be connected to both firewalls. So that means I can lose 1 switch and I can lose 1 firewall, and everything will just keep going like if nothing happened. So I'll power on everything. So while they boot, I want to explain one thing called link aggregation, or LACP. I know they're quite different, but here I will just consider them the same because this is a training on HA firewalls, not on switching technologies. So usually what you can do, something that LAG and LACP can do, is to use 2 ports and use them as being 1 logical port. So you can say port 1 and 2 are 1 port on my switch. So it's going to be a 2 gig link because you're using 2 ports, and it also adds redundancy. So usually you would go from 2 ports here to 2 ports to this switch. But here, the beauty of having stack switches is that I will use link aggregation, but instead of going from 1 switch to 1 switch, I can go from 1 switch to, well, it's 1 logical switch. So instead of taking port 1 and 2 going to port 1 and 2, I will go from port 1 and 2 here to port 1 and 1, because remember, those are stacked. They're seen as 1 logical switch. So my link aggregation, I can do it with 2 ports on the different switches, because again, I get those big cables in the back. So very important, if you want to do setup like this, you need switches that can be stacked, where 2 physical switches or more can be configured, seen, and work as one. So here I will connect my access switch to my core switch. So in the config of the switch, I do have a link aggregation set for port 1 and 2 to be on the VoIP VLAN. So I will set them to be on port 10 on this switch, and port 2 is also go here. So that's my link aggregation. So it's a 2 gig uplink and redundant as well. So going to from my access switch, where I may have tens, dozens, or hundreds of access switches, going to my core switches, and I'm connecting to both. So again, this is one switch. So I have a link aggregation of 2 ports from the access switch going to 2 ports on my core switch. That is again one switch. So I got this part done here. I'll keep going. On the firewall, between the core and the firewall, I'm personally a huge fan of keep things simple. The more simple it is, the less chances it has to fail. If you compare a bicycle to a car, the bicycle is much less complex. It tends to fail way less often than a car. Just very bad example, but you get the point. So if I don't see added values in going with something complex, I'm not going to do it. Why would I do something complex that can fail and not gain anything? So one thing that works very well, and I personally suggest you go with, here I've done link aggregation because it's a very common switch technology. But here on the firewall, I don't need link aggregation, right? I can have my data stuff, data network, going to the core. I can have multiple servers here, a lot of bandwidth. Link aggregation can be useful. But going from the core to the firewall, maybe I don't need a crazy amount of bandwidth. And because there is a feature that we can use in the firewall that is simple port redundancy. Does not require to create a lag here, no need to create a lag there, just simple assign the port to a VLAN just like if it was any standard port. I love it, it's dead simple, and it works extremely well. So I like it because again, if you don't need to create extra complexity, don't do it. Personally, just again, my opinion, I've tried both, and we will in the video try both between port redundancy on the firewall and link aggregation, and they work as good. I haven't seen any difference. When I pull cable, I lose audio for like a split of a second in both cases. So to me, I don't see value in doing link aggregation. And if you do need more bandwidth and you'd be like, yeah, but I would like the 2 gig. Well, there are 10 gig ports on the firewalls and the switches, so use the 10 gig ports. So what I'll do for now is to work to connect both firewalls to both core switches. Oh, and while I'm here, I'm just going to reconnect those. So 22 to 22, 23 to 23, right? Those are my HA ports. So access switch, go to the core switch going to the firewall. Remember, that was port 12. So I'll pick first firewall going to the first switch. And here, something we will have to set in the firewall is port redundancy. So I will use port 13. It's not configured yet. We'll do it in a minute. So port 13. So remember, my port 12 goes to this switch. Actually, let me bring the camera closer. It should be better. So first firewall here. Port 12 goes to the first switch. And here I will set a redundant port in a minute. And I'll bring it to port 5, but on the second switch. So that's the way that this firewall is actually able to access both switches. So if the top switch dies, well, it's going to be able to connect to the second switch using the other port that we have here. And then we need to do the same thing with the bottom firewall. We need that firewall to actually be able to talk to both switches as well. So more cable. Port 12 of the second firewall will bring it to port 6 of the first switch, and port 13 will bring it to port 6 of the second switch. Quite a fair amount of cables. And next is to connect my phone. So phone will go into the access switch. So see, my phone is connected to the access switch. Link aggregation going to both switches here, and both switches are connected to both firewalls. Then I need my internet to be back, right? I have nothing here. What I would suggest to do is to have two internet lines, because if you lose one switch, because right now I'm going to connect my ISP to the first switch, but if I lose that switch, then I've lost all internet access, right? Because my internet feeds come from this one. So if I would suggest to have a real zero point of failure would be to add a second ISP and to bring it on the second switch. So port 1 is my ISP, port 2 will be going to X1 on the first firewall, and port 3 on X1 on the second firewall. So pretty much the same setup we've done with the previous setup without redundant switches. So one VLAN here, port 1, 2, and 3 are on a VLAN, so only 3 ports are a member of that VLAN, and it gives internet access to both firewalls. Next, my LAN. So X0 goes to, just gonna move it here so you guys see a bit better. So X0 will need to go into, I'll bring it to port 23, and I'll do again a port redundancy, which is not configured yet. So that will be port 2, and port 2 will be going in port 23, but on the second switch. And the same with the other firewall. X0 of the second firewall goes into the first switch, and X2 of the second firewall goes into the second switch. Okay, so now we did our cabling. Next is to actually do the config. So in the UI, what we need to do now is to set our interfaces, right? Remember I told you on the firewall I like doing things simple, so instead of doing a link aggregation or LACP, I just did port redundancy. Requires no changes on the firewall, on the switches. No need to create a lag or anything. It's dead simple. So in order to do this, it's pretty simple on the firewall too. X0, remember I use X0 connected to both switches, and I said I will use X2 and connect it to, I took X0 and connected to the first switch, and I use X2 to connect to the second switch. So I'll need to tell the firewall that X2 is the redundant port. So I'll edit X0, go into advanced, aggregation port, I will say port redundancy and pick X2. And hit OK. And I'll do the same with my VoIP port. VoIP is port 12. Remember, I use port 13. It's pretty easy to see, right? I got 1 gig full duplex instead of no link. So pretty clear that I did use port 13. So I will edit port 12, go in advance and say you have a redundant port and I want you to use port 13 for this. And that's it. So pretty dead easy again. I like it. No need to go into creating a lag and everything. And next I want to show you a bit the config of the switch, because there is a feature on the switch called spanning tree that I would advise to disable on the port where we connected the firewall. So see here, if I go into, that's my Dell switch. If I go into spanning tree port setting, it's always a good thing to have STP, spanning tree protocol, on. It's a great safety net. But here with the firewall, I know I've connected both firewall on port 5 and 6 on both switches. So in order for, very fast failover, I will disable spanning tree on port 5 and 6 of both switches. So see, unit 1, port 5. See, STP is disabled. Same for port 6. And same for unit 2, port 5, and unit 2, port 6. And if we go look at the VLAN config, see VLAN membership, pretty straightforward. I pick my VLAN 700 that I've called VoIP. And what I've done, port 5 and 6 are on tag on this VLAN. And the same goes for switch number 2. So that's what I like about port redundancy on the firewall. Dead stupid to set up. And the less functionality are used, the less chances it will break within the next many years when you do an OS upgrade, a firmware upgrade on your firewall and a firmware upgrade on your switch. Maybe the way in 5 years from now, maybe the Dell switches or any brand of switches you use, maybe they'll change the way they do lag. Maybe it's not going to work with the firewall anymore. Will require changes in the config or anything, right? So if I'm not using anything, if I'm not using the less stuff and features I use to get the job done, I feel the less chances I have for things to break. So, and as I mentioned, I tried both, and I'll show you both with port redundancy and link aggregation. I don't get any more value. The only value I could get is more throughput, but if I need more throughput, I'll just use the 10 gig ports, right? So, and now is time to test it out. So, time to test and demo HA failover in a fully redundant setup. So again, I have my access switch. You could have many of those where you connect phones, laptops, and everything. Then here I do have my core switches, 2 switches that are stacked together. And here I do have my 2 firewall in HA. So I will again place a phone call. Put myself on hold so I get lovely music playing. So first thing I want to show you is the link aggregation working. So that is my phone connected to the access switch. Just move like this. Actually, I'll move you guys here. So that's the phone, the cable for the phone, and that's my link aggregation here going to both switches. So let's see this. I'll unplug one cable and pay attention to the music. I'll do it again because the volume was quite low on the phone. So, as you can see, the LEDs are blinking quite a lot on the bottom cable. So that is link aggregation between So that's link aggregation between the access switch and the core switch. So nothing to do with the firewalls. Next, here we do have both of our switches and both firewalls. So one thing we can do, as you can see here, this firewall is the active one. As you can see, the one is blinking a lot compared to this one. So this is the active firewall. So first thing I'll do, on this firewall, we see this LED is blinking quite a lot because that's the active firewall. And it's port redundancy, so everything goes through this one. So pay attention to music again. We barely lost any audio. And that did not trigger a failover on the firewall because I got redundant ports, so the firewall is like, well, everything works great. So there is no failover on the firewall that has been done. That was just a port failover. And next, I will unplug that cable here, and that will trigger a HA failover. As you can see, music came back right away. So next is to try to pull power on equipment. So here, my active firewall is this one. As you can see, the WAN is blinking a lot more. So what we'll do is pull power on the bottom firewall. As you can hear, we lost audio. And audio is back. I'll put you guys back here. So now we've lost one switch. Let's unplug another switch. We'll unplug the one at the bottom. We lost audio again. And audio came back. So that's the beauty of a fully redundant setup with two. I'll just stop the music. So that's the beauty here of a complete redundant setup. So I got my both firewalls here, 2 core switches. So I've unplugged many cables and I unplugged one firewall, one switch, and everything kept going. And next, as promised, here we've done port redundancy, which is my personal favorite. And some will want to do link aggregation, so I figured I will show link aggregation as well and show you how it works and the effect it has as well. So, first thing we will do in my switch, those port 5 and 6 here and here going to both firewalls are configured as standard port where I just disable spanning tree like I mentioned. 11 and 12 are set to be link aggregation, so I will just move my cables here. And then we'll go in the firewall and set link aggregation. So, first thing I'll have to do is remove my port redundancy I had. So I'll go into my X1 again, hit edit, and take my redundancy to none. I'll do this for both. So VoIP as well, edit VoIP, and click on none. Then link aggregation is into the switching aspect. Go into link aggregation and I'll click on add. Aggregator port is my X12. You need to type in a key. I'll type 12. Member port, I will take port 13. I'll turn on LACP. And on my switch, I found that for LACP to work well, those things seems to match. And again, it's not a switching training, but in my switch, I do have destination IP and destination port as a load balancing type, so I will make them match. So I'll just click OK and hit close. And as you can see, it already discovered on one port, on port 12, it already discovered my Dell switch. So that is pretty nice. And if I go back in my interfaces, we see here port shield to X12 link aggregation, LAG. So that's pretty much it. Next is, of course, to give it a try. So we'll go back over there. And now it's time to test it out with link aggregation on the firewall as well. Not my favorite, but I figured I could show the effect it has and show that it doesn't really bring anything more than just basic port redundancy. So let's give it a try. Okay, so I'll bring you close here. So as you can see, the active firewall is the one at the bottom. LEDs are blinking a lot more. So I will unplug one cable. Music came back within a split of a second, and that did generate a HA failover. As you can see here, now the LED is blinking pretty hard on the first one. So now I can unplug one more and see music came back very quickly. So pretty much the same as, so that was pretty much the same value as doing link. Shut the music off. So it was pretty much the same value as doing link aggregation. It just creates a bit more of a failover if the interface goes down, but in terms of time to recover, both cases was pretty much a split of a second worth of audio that were lost, so didn't see much value. And one thing you have to be very careful if you do link aggregation. I've seen many people screwing it up because here those two cables goes into port 11 on both switches. So port 11 needs to be one lag, and then the two ports of the bottom firewall goes on port 12 of the other firewall. The bottom firewall, both cables goes into port 12 of both switches. So that needs to be another lag. I've seen people screwing it up and taking those 4 ports here and make one big lag with them, which will create you a ton of issues because half the traffic will go to a firewall that is not in use and not working because it is the passive appliance. So be careful. If you really want to do a lag, you need to have, again, ports coming from one firewall in one lag and port coming from the other firewall in another lag. So that switches, as it is right now, as 3 lags. One going to the top switch, which is both port 10, one going to the top firewall, which is both ports 11, and another lag going to the bottom firewall, which is both port 12. So that's one thing to be very careful, and another reason why I like simplicity, because it's another way to shoot yourself in the foot, and again, it doesn't bring any value. So to me, again, personal recommendation, keep it simple. Port redundancy works fine. If you need more throughput, there's 10 gig ports over here, and we have Firewall coming out that will have 25 gig, 40 gig, and 100 gig ports. So plenty of ports to get full of bandwidth. So again, keep it simple. I love doing it with port redundancy. And finally, I promised I would update the firmware of that HA. So HA is fully functional, and I will start a VoIP call and start the OS upgrade of my HA. So that will update, of course, both appliances firmware. So first thing I'll show you is how to get it done. Then I'll move the mic and the camera next to the phone, start a VoIP call again, put myself on hold, and perform a OS upgrade so you guys can see the effect of what's happening when you do a OS upgrade on of an HA setup of Firewall. So first, download the latest firmware. I'm not going to show you this. I assume you know how it's done. Go into Device, Setting, Firmware, and Settings. Always do a export configuration first. Just like absolutely in everything in IT, you back up stuff before doing major changes. So firewalls are no exception. So export configuration first. Then we do update firmware. Okay, on this, browse for the firmware we want, and I have it here. Click open, upload, and now the firmware is being uploaded to the firewall. Okay, see here, we're still running on 1262, which is the firmware I'm running now. And that's the one I just uploaded, 1456. And as you can see, this is current firmware. That's what's running. And this is uploaded firmware, the one I just uploaded, right? And here I have the option to simply delete it if I want. And here, if I click on that power button, I do have the option to boot firmware with current configuration, which is the one I'll do, or boot that firmware, but erase all setting boot factory default, which is not what we will do. So I'm not going to click on that button right away. I'll move the camera and the mic on the next to the firewall so you can see what's going on. I'll place the call to get the on hold music, and you guys will be able to see what's going on. Okay, a little bit of light will be better, so let's place the call. Okay. So see, this one is the active firewall. Everything is blinking quite a lot. And now I'll go update the firmware. I'm just gonna reduce the volume here. So see, that one was the active firewall, it didn't change, but see, that one is currently rebooting, right? So from what it seems, it is first doing a firmware update on the passive appliance first. And I don't know if you're gonna hear it on the audio, but the fans are spinning pretty loudly on this one, so that leads me to believe it is currently rebooting. And now we see this firewall, all ports are offline, and I don't know if you've heard, but personally I haven't seen any lose in audio. So everything switched from this one to this one, so that one now is updated, it has the latest firmware, and that one is currently, I guess, in process of getting its firmware updated as well. So that's again nice value of the stateful HA. Everything moved fully transparently from this one to the newly updated box with the latest firmware, and nothing stopped, everything kept going as is. And now this appliance is currently rebooting now. And now it seems like the HA is fully updated. Both are back online. As you can see here, lights are the same and all interfaces are up. So let's go look at the UI. I'm pretty sure everything is back online. We'll stop the audio. In here we see the firmware is actually running on the firewall. And you can go back, check our HA status and see everybody's happy. So I hope you liked that video. If you do have any questions, please feel free to reach out to your local SonicWall team. And if you don't know who they are, feel free to ping me. I'll be more than happy to introduce you to your local team. So with that, thanks again for watching and see you in the next one. Have a good day.